This podcast is brought to you thanks to the generous support of Whistler Blackcomb, leaders in delivering adventure.
Once the loading of the patient was done, in my mind, I had to get back to my admin duties, and I jumped on my bike and coasted down an easy trail, ended up too high in a corner on a trail that I ride a million times. Handlebar clips a tree, and the next thing I know, it steers me into the next tree, and there we go. I am going to the clinic myself with broken clavicles, and you reflect on it and go, my mind was totally somewhere else.
Welcome to Delivering Adventure. This is the podcast that explores what it really takes to share adventure like a pro, with your friends, your family, and as a profession. My name is Chris Capio, and I'm coming to you from Whistler, British Columbia.
And I'm Jordy Shepard, recording from Canmore, Alberta. After a lifetime of working extensively in different parts of the adventure guiding industry, Chris and I have teamed up to launch this podcast. In each episode, you will hear top adventure guides, managers, marketers, and athletes share their best stories, advice, and trade secrets. The goal of this podcast is to share how you can take yourself and others farther from the mountains to the office and beyond. We have touched on the role that human factors can play when it comes to making decisions a number of times this season. While there are many human factors that can influence our judgment, they can all fit into one of three different categories. These are bias, blindness, and lack of foresight. Bias factors that can influence our judgment includes cognitive biases, personal preferences, motivations, pressures, and expectations. Blindness happens when we either ignore or fail to see important information or better options. A lack of foresight is really a lack of anticipation or imagination, where we fail to imagine the likely outcome of following a certain course of action. One of the factors that can affect our ability to collect information and can impact our foresight is situational awareness. Situational awareness is the ability to perceive, understand, and effectively respond to one's situation. This includes being able to recognize the hazards around us, the state of ourselves and the people we are with, changing conditions, and the overall direction that the situation we are in is likely to go. When it comes to delivering adventure, a lack of situational awareness can impact our judgment in ways that can either boost or degrade our decision-making and our ability to react to situations that we are in. An example is failing to realize that someone is on a collision course with you, or you are on a collision course with someone else. Another example is failing to notice that one of the members of your group is no longer with you because they went the wrong way. A third example is missing the fact that your performance is declining due to a combination of fatigue setting in and being dehydrated because it's a hot day and you haven't been drinking enough.
There are a number of factors that can impair our situational awareness, including being fatigued and stressed, being subjected to too much information at once, which can overload our capacity to process information effectively, being distracted, being complacent, and generally lacking focus or being switched off. All of these things can make it harder to recognize hazards and to spot dangers, accurately assess the people we are leading, notice changing conditions, and anticipate how situations are likely to unfold so that we can prevent problems from happening. Joining us to explore how situational awareness can affect us and how we can protect our awareness is Jerome David. Jerome is an ACMG ski guide who currently works as a guide and manager at Whistler Heli skiing. Jerome has also worked as a ski patroller and bike patroller at Whistler Blackcomb. At the end of this thoughtful conversation, Jordy and I will summarize the key points which are highlighted in the show notes. Also in the show notes is a link to our social media feeds. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Here is Jerome David.
Hi, Jerome. Welcome to the show. Where are you right now?
Hello, I'm in Whistler, British Columbia.
Tell us about your path into the adventure industry and what do you do now?
What do I do now? I am a ski guide, lead guide, and guide manager at Whistler Heli skiing. We started this road here in Whistler, came here for skiing 98, 99, and started enjoying the coast skiing in the area here. Started ski touring, and eventually, from working at the office at Whistler Heli Skiing, I thought guiding would be fun. So I started pursuing that. And in the summertime, I ended up working in the bike park in its early stages and seen this whole development here in the biking industry since the 2000s, and been part of building and maintaining the trail network outside of the bike park here in Whistler, and patrolling in the bike park for it was 18 years until I stopped a couple of years ago. And in the wintertime, I on the coast here developed into ski guides through the ACMG program, which took me all through British Columbia as well, but stayed on the coast. Made this my home.
Nice. So we're here to talk about situational awareness and how important it is when we're delivering adventure to either ourselves or others. Can you give us an example of a situation where a lack of situational awareness either did or could have gotten you into trouble?
Over the years, there's been a few of those. I'm going to jump back to one in particular when I was working in a bike park where it got me into trouble. It led to injury. I was supervising the patrol at the time, and I was headed down from the bike park to my office to do payroll. It was a busy time. There was lots of things going on. And there was also a rush of a few accidents. So halfway down the mountain, I stopped. There was an ambulance, assisted my team to load the patient in. There was a few other things going on where we were having to allocate resources. And once the loading of the patient was done, in my mind, I had to get back to my admin duties, and I jumped on my bike and coasted down an easy trail, beeline that is kind of the introductory trail there, and end up too high in a corner on a trail that I ride a million times. Handlebar clips a tree, and the next thing I know, it steers me into the next tree. Major impact. I was going fast. And reflecting on that moment, I was like, wow, my mind was totally somewhere else than on this bike that I was riding on a trail that I had to pay attention. I was thinking of going in the office, having to do this payroll, kind of reflecting on this last patient, if there had to be done, what had to need a follow-up. And there we go. I am going to the clinic myself with a broken clavicle. So yeah, that was a huge lack of situational awareness. And then you reflect on it and goes, my mind was totally somewhere else. I sat in the moment doing what I should be doing, paying attention.
Well, that's the irony, that doing a bit of emergency response there and kind of getting into that mode, and then you're back into kind of more your regular mode, and then you end up being responded to.
Yeah, totally. That was a very frustrating day, but you learned a lot. I learned a lot of that out of that moment for sure.
And can you give us an example now where situational awareness kept you out of trouble?
Oh, there's a couple. I'm going to start first of all in the world of guiding, ski touring or heli guiding, wherever you're at or whichever guiding you're doing. You are extremely situational aware in the morning or in the first run of your day, because lots of things are happening. Going out into paying attention to the guests, their movement, how they're doing, what do I need to notice to make their day the best I can, and my day the best I can for our flow through the day. Also, then that time you're looking at the weather for the first moment, whether you're and the snowpack. So you're trying to be situational aware of three things that start the day in order to make it a good day. And so your situational awareness level is heightened in my mind at that time, just to kind of get the day started. So that happens on a regular basis. To answer another question, that last year I had an incident with a customer in a tree well, and it luckily went well. Again, it was the first run of the day, and we were going heli skiing. I had 4 guests in a small helicopter, and we were skiing. I did my observation piece of the guests, the weather, and everything. And it was a glacier run that finished through a very short traverse through the forest to an opening where the helicopter can pick us up. Observed my guests, stopped in all the normal spots, gave the last instructions, which was basically staying in my track, zigzagging, doing a zigzag of a bench down and then back, which before it pops us out to where the helicopter can pick us up. When I get down there, 1, 2, 3 guests show up and one's missing. And there was a little bit of a rise. 2 of my guests were snowboarders. I had given my snowboarders a heads up that there's a little rise just before the opening, so to keep the momentum to make it over the rise. And one was missing. So at times you kind of, depending what you want to do, you might wait a little longer, give the snowboarder a little extra time to climb over the rise. However, for me, from what I had seen on the way down in the first part of the run, I expected strong-ish level of riders and that it shouldn't be a problem. So my instinct said this is not that normal. So I told my guests to stay put for a moment, and I fairly quickly started going back up and over the rise shouting, and he wasn't to be seen just on that little rise. So I'm like, oh, so I continued sidestepping, and fair enough, within a few minutes, I had gone through the checks going, this is not normal. Transceiver out, noticed that he should be 18 meters. I should be able to see him in this little piece of forest. It wasn't a crazy run. And I continued on, pulled him out of a tree well. And that is an example where a lot of the things that I was expecting in my guiding day to take place didn't line up. And I kind of reacted fairly quickly. Other times you might wait a little longer, give more time, a little bit morning, but it's that high alertness in that first run, trying to make the day happen. In my mind, I was actually going back to boot pack for my customer and make his day easier to get to the helipad because I thought he didn't make the rise. But when I didn't see them, I went to the next step of looking for him. So yeah, that was one of those days where my situational awareness, I think, helped him because he was unconscious. We brought him back, all good. Lucky day. And that is one of those examples that things went well.
Wow. Yeah, I'd say there's maybe a little more than luck involved there because you made it happen for getting him out of that sticky situation. So in reflecting on these events, what does it take for us to be situationally aware, would you say? Just some general ideas on it.
There's a number of things. There's knowledge and experience in my mind are above what you're doing. In my working world, a good foundation of knowledge and experience creates an understanding of things that are happening so that you can note and be astute to the things that are the risks or the dangers that you want to find and notice, or even alone from also as a guide, I'm also a teacher. If I see these little issues that when guests are skiing, to be able to correct that quickly so that their day is better and our day together is good. So a good base of understanding of your environment and the work that is to be done, I think, is a good base. Also, the thinking processes that we go through, understanding them. So this, when you guys contacted me about this topic, it actually brought me back to a book I read. It's called Think Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist that did a bunch of studies around judgment and decision making. I can recommend it. It's a bit technical. It's hard reading, but very good information. And he dives into our basic thinking processes. He's divided into 2 systems. The first one being the fast, and then the second being the slow thinking process in our brains, in our minds. And I feel like it's quite the first one being instinct, gut feeling, intuition, pattern recognitions potentially, yeah. And then the second one being a more analytic, deep, and knowledgeable thought process. It's slower. So I've been thinking back to that, and we listen to our gut feeling, intuition a lot, and then be able to recognize between the two is important. Acting on one sometimes is not enough. You have to act on the other, and at times there it might trigger a deeper thought process. I don't have the answer right away, or an abnormality in my initial fast way of thinking, then might trigger me to pause in my day and think through the more of a checklist that's a deeper knowledge base to make sure or communicate with another coworker, double check, get a secondhand information. In my mind, there is a need to be able to understand your knowledge base, where it comes from and how you think about it, in order to have situational awareness, because you're reacting on a gut feeling or intuition at times.
So what would you say specifically in these examples you just gave were there for, helped with your situational awareness or were lacking in your situational awareness?
Not turning on your fast thinking process when I was biking was a problem. I was already in a slow process of logistics somewhere else, and my mind wasn't in that engaged riding moment.
Would you say that's an example of the idiom letting your guard down, basically?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. It was, and that brings me to some of the other points that I should make about situational awareness, how to maintain it. Fatigue was part of that. After you reflect and you think back, was I off? Why was my guard down? I was fatigued. I had a lot on my plate. Workload was high. And those were stresses on the system that derailed me from my in the moment attention. So that's kind of a key piece in the end. To back to your questions, what it takes is to be in a good spot with oneself in order to be situationally aware. Distractions are bad, stresses are bad. Interestingly enough, in that book, it talks about happiness quite a bit and how it relates to situational awareness. A lot of the tests they do to figure out how people with situational awareness are aware relates to happiness as well. So, and how happiness relates, and how vice versa, it relates the other way. So, being in a good spot, healthy, well rested, good diet, happy with what you're doing for work, the knowledge you have around that, I think can all heighten your situational awareness. If you have weaknesses as any of those, sometimes you might be a little off and not totally aware because there is a distraction that can throw you off.
In that example of the snowboarder who ended up being in the tree well and definitely needed help, it kind of fits the definition from the US Coast Guard, which is to identify, process, and comprehend critical elements of information about what is happening, knowing what is going on around you. And the goal of situational awareness is not to try and focus on everything in your environment at once, but rather the goal is to be attuned to what doesn't belong. And that seemed to be, you're like, this is not adding up. It's not just normal flow right now, and this does not belong.
Yeah. And in that moment, go through the deductive process. The first one was go over the rise, help him out. Oops, he's not there. Okay, let's go to the next step. And then get on a radio, go next step, transceiver, go next step. And then you're deducting one thing after the other and go into what we call the trained situation. We practice for unusual situation in the guiding world regularly. So again, knowledge and experience, readiness for that.
you're using a tool that was available to you that is for avalanche rescue, right? Your transceiver, and you're actually using it as a location device for it was snow immersion, but it was not an avalanche, and you had no thought that there was probably an avalanche that had occurred, but you use that tool and the distance ohmometer, I call it in the training I do, to tell you, wait a minute, okay, it's pretty close to me,
Yeah,
but I do not have visual reference on them.
exactly. In that, there was a piece of forest that once I've hiked, I was on my ski side, stepped back in. I had a pretty good visual. Now I couldn't tell if the track had gone the wrong way, but the instructions I had given were pretty exact. That's why I pulled out this tool, because at this time I also had the helicopter coming over it, ask him to do a circle to see if he can see the client somewhere else. He shortly after that confirmed he couldn't, but my beacon also said he was 18 meters away, which was within my shout and visual range.
So a couple things I find that tend to happen quite often when we get ourselves into trouble and we start missing things. That lack of focus is one, and that can happen for any number of reasons. Often it's we have too much information coming at us. So I think about our capacity to process things. So I think all of us only have a certain amount of bandwidth for what's going on. I'll use an example. I went to the city yesterday as I'm driving around Vancouver, and I got to tell you, there's a lot of stuff going on when you drive around the city, especially for me, because I'm not a big city person. I don't know how people can live there actually. Like I'd rather be in the middle of the forest with bears and things like that than driving through the city with pedestrians, ready to throw themselves out in front of you. And so there's just so much going on. And I caught myself driving down this road. I had not done that road before, and my partner's trying to tell me where to go. I'm trying to process everything. I'm a little bit fatigued, and all of a sudden, I ended up accidentally cutting this guy off, and I could tell that my bandwidth it was full. Right, like I just could not process everything. And I think that that's something that can happen to us. And when we're in those types of situations, what we need to try to do is to find ways to create that bandwidth. So I noticed that, a number of the pedestrians we were talking earlier are walking across the street, and they're on their phones. So all of a sudden now their focus is on their phones and not being aware of what's going on around them. And I guess this whole kind of topic, I got thinking about it because I was watching an instructor one day with their kids, and they were in the lift line and they were playing with their phone, and they missed everything that was happening around them. And it could have been that they were trying to connect with their supervisor, or they're checking on the conditions. They probably had a really good reason to be on their phone, but because they were on their phone, they missed everything that was going on around them, and they could have just pulled out their phone when they were on the chairlift and everything was good. But do you ever find yourself in that situation, or when you're dealing with your guests and you're trying to keep them focused, like how do you manage that so that the people that you're guiding remain situationally aware, or yourself?
Yeah, that's a good point. The phone is an issue. It's a total distraction that pulls us away from the task at hand. And so, in the guiding world, in my safety briefings, no phone. First of all, it's easy sometimes to say you can turn these off. There's no receptions. You can use them. We basically discuss it in details. You can use them for photos. You should go into airplane mode because of transceivers. And at this point, I'm going to ask for no photos taken while we go through these to the avalanche briefings, through the helicopter briefing, and clearly give guidance on when you cannot use your phone. You can't climb in and out of the helicopter with your phone in your hand. You can take photos in the flight, put it in your pocket. We don't want to see them in hand. We don't want to have them dropped in places. But in general, it's this tool that distracts people regularly. So it's a piece that we now have to manage throughout the day and give permission for or not. I also would say scare tactics at times. For some people, that's what alerts them to what's going on. And it doesn't necessarily be a scare tactic that is aggressive, but just and I think that's to me good guiding too. Pointing out the hazards to people, knowing what we're managing out here, what making them part of a team, of my team that's out there together, paying attention and having a safe day. So clearly communicating those pieces is is a good piece to manage the, everybody's safety.
Yeah, totally. I think making people aware of what they should be aware of is super helpful, especially if they're inexperienced and they don't know what to look for. And I find keeping people focused is another really big one. So when you know that they need to be focused, and it's like, okay, everybody, just clear your mind. Here you go. We're doing this. Another spot that I find that people do get themselves into tends to happen around transitions. So when we're going from one activity to something else. So it could be like, I'll use an example. I notice when I'm skiing on the mountain, a lot of times people will crash within about 5 meters of where I stopped. Now, it could be my looks. They get shocked when they get down beside me. I don't know. But what I tend to find is that people switch off. So it's like they're going and they're focused on their skiing, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm stopped." But I'm not stopped. I'm actually still moving. And so then they end up getting themselves into a situation where they stop being situationally aware of the fact they're still moving and they need to move their bodies to adapt. Another one is driving, right? When we go from one place that we might be familiar with to another, or if we take a break and then we start again. Those types of things, especially if it's from a high risk to a low risk situation. I find when we go from low risk to high risk, we tend to focus more. But if it's the other way around, we can get a little bit complacent. Do you find that?
Yes. No, I agree with you. That's a good example about your guest crashing close to you. Seen that for sure as well. I guess at times for the people that are a little that I can tell become excited, so that you get excited, you have a feeling of excitement, you get sidetracked, you give a yelp, a scream, you let people know, and all of a sudden the focus on the task at hand of skiing the nice snow that we're in or managing the pieces of terrain that we're through kind of get forgotten. And then that's when you can almost anticipate it at times, going, oh boy, there we go. um, yeah, a way to manage it in my mind is often to assign not assign a task or give exact directions. How are you going to stop, regroup? And for me, it's always defining a big buffer zone, 50 meters around me. You slow down. Your job is to slow down. And if not, you get yelled at, because last thing I need is somebody crashing into a group. And when we have so much space out here, it's a good point.
I just had an experience which I commonly have, which is guiding in the backcountry. But talking about the specific topic here, I think the distraction thing is huge. It's and it is for me, like me focusing on what I'm doing as a leader. If I have potential to be distracted by digital stuff or other parts of my life, getting working its way into what I'm trying to do in these potentially hazardous situations in the backcountry, with people with me, it can be a real problem. And I think we do need to set some pretty strict limitations. And we just worked through the Bo Yoho Traverse on the Wapta ice field over 4 days. And I can tell you my situational awareness was super high for those 4 days. And now I'm back out of the backcountry and I'm feeling pretty not situationally aware, pretty scattered, whole bunch of things going on. Everybody needs something from you when you're within communication reach. And that's a totally different scenario when you're connected to the rest of the world and to other parts of your life. And try as much as possible to disconnect from that, to focus on the task at hand is really important, and have your clients do that as well.
Yeah, totally. That goes with what Chris was saying. Being in the forest, you can be way more situational aware than having all those world distractions around us all the time.
I was guiding above Moraine Lake. I was going out to Eiffel Lake and in the Canadian Rockies, and I had a group. And I'd probably done that trip about 80 times and had only ever seen a bear up there once. And it's in the fall. We're cruising up, and I could hear all of the marmots are whistling. They're going like crazy, and I'd never heard that before in that zone. So I was kind of switched on, like, this is not quite right. Often, if you hear the marmots, they're usually whistling because there's a predator or there can be a storm. And the weather was meant to change, but not for a while. So the storm thing was kind of out. And so we're cruising along, and I actually see some bear scat, and I'm like, okay, yeah, there's a bear around. So we go in, continue down to the lake or just above the lake, stop, have lunch, take a break, and on the way back, I'm pretty hyper aware for quite a while, and then I just found myself just kind of switch off. Could have been a little bit later in the day, and it's the fourth person behind me that's the person that saw the bear. And the bear, to be fair, was off the trail, kind of hidden behind some trees. But I'm thinking like, oh man, I should have been like just a little bit sharper here. And I don't know whether I'm just being a little bit hard on myself or not. But for whatever reason, I just managed to switch off and had just missed it. Anyway, we backed up, got together, bear came out, did its thing, ate a bunch of berries, and then it had taken off. So it was no harm done. But it's just kind of a reminder about being switched on. And as we kind of got into discussing this topic and taking it on, um, I looked around and there's actually a Cooper color code, and it's got white. So condition white, condition yellow, condition orange, and condition red. Condition white is that totally unaware where we're just, ignorance is bliss kind of mindset.
That's the clients.
Yeah, whereas that condition, I mean, and that's a lot of people, right? And that condition, yellow is that relaxed awareness where we know that something is out there. We should be aware, but we're fairly relaxed about it. We're not too stressed. And that condition orange is that specific alert that's triggered our attention. So using my story of the bear, the bear is there, so you're on edge a little bit. And then that condition red is that fully ready to act to protect yourself from harm. And that's, for me, sometimes when I'm, skiing on the mountain, I'm worried about the crowds and people getting run into, or often the people that are behind me that I'm teaching may not have a ton of skills at times. And so then you're switched on, you're looking behind you, you're trying to be aware of the fact that you could get run over. And so you're taking steps to try to get out of the way, if that should happen. So looking for escape routes and things like that. How do we cycle through this, and what should our expectations be through the course of a day?
When I'm guiding, and how where do I fit into? Where do these fit in with? And you have your routine, you have the product you want to deliver, and just like I mentioned earlier, I would say in the start of my day, I probably jump up maybe to the orange. It's nothing wildly, but the orange puts you a little bit more. I don't have it in front of me to exactly describe it, but I'm a little trying to pay a little bit more attention to situational awareness, looking at my clients for the first time, finally touching the snowpack, looking at the weather, getting a feel for how the day is going. Then I might go down to yellow, and unless something goes unusually wrong or something jumps out, but it's more relaxing. I'm in a pattern. If it's a general day, I guess a day could depend. The environment is also an impact. If it's a very stormy day and we're flying around, then I'm probably in the orange world no longer. But if it's a sunny day and things look good, I might drop down to the yellow. When you go into this situation where you have an accident, like the tree well incidents, then all of a sudden, whoomp, I'm into the red world. It's interesting because it describes what to do and how to behave in certain places. But really, when it's about noticing the situational awareness, it's a little different in that sense. That where am I in that?
But I think that ability to make that happen, to pick the right mode of, as far as that color scale goes, really relies on three things, right? It's being perceptive to notice what's going on and to look for those pattern recognitions, recognize those patterns to see if something is off from what we should expect to see, and then being able to understand why that is, and then having that ability to anticipate it or project. And that's one of the things I find that people can struggle with, is that that ability to anticipate or imagine like likely outcomes, especially if people are inexperienced and like you said, if they're tired, right, or rushing, or you've just got too much coming at you, you just stop being able to think about, what could happen. It goes back to your skier there that ended up in the tree well. If you didn't recognize that as being a hazard and put together that, hey, maybe based on the conditions that we have today, maybe that person's ability created a likely scenario where they could have ended up in the tree well, and then if they were there, this is what's going to happen. That then perhaps not recognizing that, or being able to recognize that, makes you pushes you down on that color scale, right? So all of a sudden you're thinking, oh well, they're not here, but they'll be here in a while, as opposed to, oh, they're not here, that's a problem. We better go and address this.
Yeah.
So Jerome, is there anything else you think people should know that would help them to be more aware of the surroundings and the situations that they're in?
There's also sometimes biases of our own way of thinking that can lead us into a certain direction or make us assume certain reactions, whether it's in, again, that initial uh, fast thinking moment. Because of my experience, I think it's going to be like that. Or even through the knowledge I gained through growing up, I think a certain way, this way, but it could be wrong. Recognizing that that's what I've been taught, that's the way I think, but really maybe in certain situation I might be off, and knowing that. So being open to kind of learn, pay attention, and shift if need be is a big piece. If you're obsessed with something, stuck in a certain way, you might not have that flexibility, and it'll challenge you to be situational aware in certain moments.
Jerome, this has been great. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me and having a discussion on this. It's interesting.
We would like to thank Jerome for joining us in this episode. If you want to go skiing with Jerome, you can find him at Whistler Heli Skiing. We will post a link in the show notes. We'll also post a link to Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This is the book that Jerome referenced when we were discussing System 1 and 2 thinking. It is an excellent read. Chris, what were some of your takeaways from this discussion? How can we become more situationally aware?
Well, a lot of good points there, Jordy. Let's start by talking about how we can adopt the appropriate awareness level. A key component of being situationally aware is recognizing which Cooper color code you should be in a given moment. Is it okay for you to be in white mode where you're relaxed? Do you need to increase your awareness level to yellow or orange because the threat level is increased? Do you need to be on high alert in the red zone because danger is likely imminent? Spending a lot of time in the orange and red zones can be fatiguing, while switching off and relaxing in the white zone can lead to complacency. So we always need to ask ourselves, how alert do we need to be? If you feel yourself drifting or zoning out, taking time to refocus when needed is important. Living in the moment by concentrating on the task at hand can reduce distraction and complacency. It can also help us to switch from System 2 thinking, where slower reasoned thinking can consume our bandwidth at the expense of being able to process information and react faster with our System 1 thinking. As Jerome mentioned, our System 1 thinking allows us to tap into pattern recognition, experience, and intuition. This can allow us to react faster to quickly changing situations like skiing, biking, trail running, and whitewater canoeing and kayaking. Another key point is boosting our bandwidth. People are like computers, they only have so much processing power at any one time. To boost our ability to process everything around us, we may need to slow things down. Doing this may require us to move slower, take on fewer tasks at a time, or delegate information collecting to others. Ensuring we are rested is another key strategy. So, Jordy, what did you get out of this episode?
Well, Chris, again, many things to take out of it, as with all of our episodes. First off, be aware of transitions. When we switch activities or change the intensity of tasks, we need to make sure we refocus. Failing to do so can cause our minds to become focused on what we were just doing instead of paying attention to what we were doing in that moment. An example of a transition to be aware of is going from low risk to high risk situations or vice versa. Transitions also lead to the potential for taking up a lot of time. Look ahead to transitions and don't let your group waste time. Chris, do you have an example related to transitions?
Yeah, I do, Jordy. I had a ski patrol director tell me a while ago that one of the areas that patrollers were getting injured is when they transitioned from throwing explosives to skiing away. This is the classic example of going from a high risk, intensive situation to a more familiar, lower risk activity. In this example, it's very easy for a patroller to still be thinking about what they were just doing and fail to switch their system one thinking on so that they can be in ski mode.
Well, that's a great example, Chris. Another takeaway from this episode is to reduce external distractions. This can include storing phones, giving people less instruction in complex situations, or waiting for other people to pass you on the trail or climb so that you can stay focused. And lastly, plan ahead. This can include making lists so you don't miss anything. Briefing people on what to expect, what they should look for, or be aware of can help to switch people on. This brings us to the end of another episode of Delivering Adventure. If you enjoyed it, make sure you share it with your friends, colleagues, and clients. We have an easily shareable link in our show notes. Thanks for listening.